Welcome to the February portion of our 12-month Buddhist practice. We are still in the wisdom category of our 12 months practice. As you may remember, we are following the threefold training in Buddhism, which is going to be wisdom, morality, conduct, and concentration, which are the three groupings of the Buddhist Noble Eightfold Path. So this second month, we are going to focus on some core sutras or suttas of Shakyamuni Gautama Buddha. And that's going to really reinforce what you learned on the first month, which is just going to be this general foundational understanding of Buddhism. So now, as we go into these particular sutras or suttas, you get a more of an understanding of what the Buddha taught and how that really shaped and impacted all the different Buddhist traditions and practices that we have now. Now, I realize there's many different types of Buddhist traditions out there. So in your particular Buddhist tradition, you may never have even read or understood any of these sutras or suttas, and that's perfectly okay. We're really going to go down to the core foundation here. So you're going to find these suttas all over the internet. You can just search for them. You'll be able to find them. They're often very well translated. But I'd also like you to look for commentaries by monastics and teachers. So just an intellectual understanding of these sutras or suttas is not enough. We want to understand how to apply this in our daily Buddhist practice. So as Buddhist practitioners, it's all about getting out there and practicing Buddhism, not just getting this intellectual understanding of Buddhism. And we're very attracted or attached to intellectual understanding of things. But a Buddhist said that's just not enough. You can just have this intellectual understanding, but that's not going to get you to that enlightenment awakening stage. So make sure you definitely check out some commentaries so you can understand these sutras and sutras. And I'll put some links to these and other things in the comments and description below so you can gain easy access to it. So let's go into what these ones I'd like you to explore. Remember, these are just some examples. If you are maybe in the second year of doing this and you want to explore some other ones, that's perfectly okay as well. So the first one is basically called setting the wheel of the Dharma or Dhamma in motion. And this is one of those foundational core ones that you should really read because what it's talking about here is the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. So before he became the Buddha, he was teacher, very well understood practitioner, teacher, but he wasn't enlightened, right? And he did have some disciples, followers as well, but he's realizing this isn't exactly the practice that's going to make me enlightened. And he left them to, as we now know, become the Buddha. And he was, awakened and enlightened to that and realized nirvana, became the Buddha, this enlightened teacher. But what we're seeing with this particular sutra or sutta is where he encountered those disciples of his that he left in that essentially prior teaching that he was doing, prior path that he was taking. And so when they encountered him, it was really this crossroads for the Buddha, that really this key pivotal point in what we now call the Buddhist religion. Because here he is, not only is he encountering people that he knows, but it's probably going to be one of his toughest people to convince that he is now enlightened. It's something that they were all trying to do. They're all trying to become enlightened. What does that really mean? We're not sure. Enlightened or awakened to what? But he now understands, the fundamental truths of things. He's become awakened, enlightened, become a Buddha. And so he's encountered his former disciples and he has to convince them in a very skillful means and in ways that they understand, are convinced of, right? Because they are not really happy with him. He abandoned them basically. And he's looking totally different. And you realize something's different about him, but they don't know what, but they do have these preconceived notions about him based upon his actions. So when he gives what we now call the teaching about the Four Noble Truths, which is really the condensed version, core teachings of Buddhism, if you really think about it, they went, yes, absolutely. You have, really become enlightened. You really become what you now call the Buddha. And this is something which was pivotal because if he couldn't convince them, where would his path have actually been, right? And where would Buddhism even be today if he couldn't convince people that he's known for years? But he did. So this particular teaching, I think, is a great one for you to explore and to read and see the commentaries on as well. But it's really one of those core foundational ones. Then we're going to go into the Noble Eightfold Path. So this sutra or sutta is, of course, core as well, because when you look at the Four Noble Truths, you're seeing that the fourth noble truth is going to be the Noble Eightfold Path. It's the Buddha's path towards awakening, enlightenment, and nirvana. So when you combine the teaching of the Four Noble Truths and then the teaching of the Noble Eightfold Path, you're really understanding a lot about everything with Buddhism and how to practice Buddhism. Just like you've learned this entire 12 months practice, the three groupings of the Eightfold Path, wisdom, morality, conduct, and concentration, are also a threefold training inside a lot of Buddhist traditions. So this is why it's so foundational and so core. Now, the next one after that, it's going to be a favorite for a lot of Westerners, but you're going to see this across the world as well. It's going to be the fire sermon, and the fire sermon is really, I think it's really in the hearts of a lot of Westerners because you can really relate to it. It's very vivid imagery. But when we look at the Buddha, a lot of people don't understand he was teaching for decades, right? And he actually traveled a lot. And he went to places that maybe were or were not friendly to him or even knew who he was. And one of them was this society of fire worshippers. So these were monastics, but it wasn't Buddhist monastics. They were worshiping a fire religion. And just like it sounds, it was fire. And so when he was there, he was able to give this great sermon, which we now call the fire sermon. And he was basically saying, hey, monks, look all around you. Everything is on fire. And this was really a wake-up call. And I like this sermon a lot because it's really talking to us a lot about mindfulness. And you think about mindfulness in the everyday world, we think, being mindful of things, being relaxed and calm, peaceful, and all that. Buddhists, we associate Buddhist mindfulness with really putting these safeguards, these protectors to all what we call our sense organs, like eyes, ears, nose, mouth, whatever, and against these sense objects around us. And that's really what the Buddha was talking about. All these sense objects around us are like fire. You want to have that fire put inside you, right? No, fire is not it can't be a very, as we know, helpful thing for a lot of things, right? But in the context the Buddha was talking about, it's like that can burn you, right? That's not what you want. So when you see all these sense objects around you, what are you doing with them? Are you putting the right safeguards up to prevent yourself from ingesting unwholesome things, these things that are all on fire, right? Now, of course, he wasn't saying they were actually physically on fire. He was trying to give this very vivid imagery that, number one, they understood they were fire worshippers, but also to go, that's not something you want inside you, right? And I'm highly condensing this entire sermon, but what was great about it was all those monks became Buddhists after that, what we now call Buddhists. They became disciples of the Buddha. They were so convinced by that teaching. So he understood how to speak to them. And even 2,600 years later, we can really understand that teaching, even in our own life, right? We see things that we want, or we see things in a certain way, and we have perceptions about them or ideas about them, and that gives rise to thoughts inside our head, right or wrong. And every two different people can have two different views of things, right? And that's really, I think, a great sermon for you to explore. And then the last one is going to be teaching about not self. So we talk a lot about not self or non-self inside Buddhism, and this is a great one to also explore. So to read it and also listen to the commentaries as well, because this is a core teaching in Buddhism. We want to break down the idea that we have something inside us is a permanent, unchanging, independent self. The Buddha says that doesn't exist. We are impermanent, we are ever changing and interdependent upon other things to exist in its current form. And I really like this particular sutra and sutta, but also the teachings about it in general. So as you start listening to commentary, you see how it kind of expands over. So the Buddha taught for many decades, right? All of his teachings, many different sermons about him, but these are some of the core ones, maybe sometimes the first ones. When we understand the true idea of like what our self is. So it doesn't mean that you don't exist right now. You absolutely 100% exist right now. We know that you exist, I exist, but we don't really fundamentally, and I'm talking about intellectually, but fundamentally understand that we are truly impermanent, in that we are ever changing and interdependent upon other things. We don't really understand that. And we may have an intellectual understanding of that, but something fundamental we don't understand about that. And that's why we're still in this current state. So all our actions, our intentional volitional actions, our karma is really based upon this attachment to self. And again, it's not saying you don't exist, but this idea we have, this really core, deep belief inside ourselves, that's the problem. So we are a temporary grouping of things called the skanahas or aggregates, and it works so seamlessly together, it gives this false illusion of a permanent, unchanging, independent, and self that we are really attached to and we believe and create all these actions upon. So the teaching about not self in the sutta is a great one for you to explore. Now, these are courses, core ones. Next month, we're going to round out our wisdom category with some other sutras and suttas that are a lot going to be on the Mahayana side. So even if you're a Theravada practitioner, you're going to find some benefit to that to understand how the other half of Buddhism lives and what they believe and what it means, right? I think it'll be a great one, but we'll also cover some other things as well. But that'll give us a nice understanding of the wisdom category when it comes to Buddhism. But we'll cover a lot of different things. I'm just talking about next month's coming up, but this is going to be one where I want you to focus on this month. Again, I'll put all these links in the description or comments below so you can gain access to them. But of course, you can just do an internet search. But these are great things to start with. Feel free to ask questions, comments below, or if you want to go to my group, that link will be below as well. We can discuss it. If you encounter a great commentary, share it. If you have a great insight or understanding, great, share it. And I think that's really what I want to see with this is that interactive component of this 12 months practice. It's just not yourself doing it by yourself. Get the community involved as well, even if that's online. With that, if you have any questions, again, bring them up. But if not, I will see you next month when we cover some other Buddhist sutras and suttas. Thank you.